My brother changed the locks on my childhood home 6 days after we buried our mother. Then he threw my 7-year-old daughter's belongings onto the porch in the rain. Her sneakers were soaked. Her stuffed rabbit was face down in a puddle. And Garrett stood in the doorway and said, "You don't belong here anymore." Then he looked at my daughter and added, "You better get used to being homeless." What he didn't know was that our father had left one final condition in his will. And when that condition was finally revealed, my brother discovered that the sister he had spent his entire life underestimating was worth $5.83 million. My name is Brooke Merritt. I grew up in Marietta, Ohio, in a family where the Merritt name meant everything. My father, Thomas, owned our family's woodworking business. My brother Garrett was 6 years older, and Dad always treated him like the future. Garrett worked in the shop. I worked in the kitchen. Whenever inheritance came up, Dad repeated the same sentence. "The land stays with the Merritt son. Girls marry out." When I was 15, I asked if I could work in the shop. Dad looked at me and said, "Why bother? You're not staying." So I left. I went to college, earned an accounting degree, then a master's in forensic accounting. Eventually, I built my own company investigating financial fraud. By my late 20s, I had made more money than anyone in my family knew. I quietly built a fortune of more than $5 million. But my family never noticed. To Garrett, my career was just a calculator job. I stopped explaining myself. Then Dad died suddenly of a heart attack. I returned home and handled the funeral, paperwork, insurance, and everything else. Garrett spent his time talking about carrying on Dad's legacy. 6 weeks later, Mom died from a stroke. At her funeral, Garrett talked about being his father's son. He never mentioned me. Afterward, the family attorney, Raymond Voss, pulled me aside. "Don't leave town yet," he said. My father had changed his will, and both Garrett and I were required to attend the official reading. 6 days later, Garrett called me. "Get out of the house by Friday." "It's mine." I reminded him the will hadn't been read. He laughed. "Everyone knows the family rule." That evening, I discovered he had already changed the locks. My suitcase, my daughter's clothes, and several of Mom's belongings were sitting outside in the rain. Garrett's wife stood in the doorway and told me the house wasn't really my daughter's home anyway. So I packed everything into my car. We spent the night in a cheap motel. My daughter thought it was an adventure. I sat on the edge of the bed wondering whether I should simply go back to Columbus and forget the whole thing. But I remembered Raymond's words. Dad had changed the will. So I stayed. A few days later, I went to the woodworking shop. Garrett was selling Dad's tools. Decades of hand planes, chisels, and equipment were being sold to strangers. Against the wall sat an old green toolbox. The will said Dad's personal tools belonged to me. Garrett laughed. "Take the junk." So I did. That night, I opened the toolbox. Inside were 3 things. Dad's old carpenter's pencil, a small brass key labeled Boathouse, and a mortgage document. Dad had borrowed hundreds of thousands of dollars against the family home to rescue Garrett from failed real estate investments. I immediately called Raymond. He told me Garrett was drowning in debt. The family home was heavily mortgaged. The woodworking business had liens. But there was one asset Garrett hadn't touched. 18 acres beside the river. The property included an old boathouse and was worth roughly $1.1 million. Dad had separated it from the rest of the estate. And he created one final condition. Both children had to submit certified financial statements. The 18 acres would go to whichever child could prove they had enough financial strength to keep the property debt-free for at least 10 years. Garrett was confident. He submitted his statement first. His verified net worth? Negative $41,600, then Raymond opened mine. My company equity, $2.4 million. Investments, $1.9 million. Commercial properties, $1.1 million. Retirement accounts and cash reserves. Outstanding debt? 0. My verified net worth was $583 million. The morning of the will reading, Garrett walked in wearing an expensive suit like he had already won. Raymond read the ordinary provisions first. Garrett received the family home and woodworking business. I received Dad's personal tools and the green toolbox. Garrett smiled. Then Raymond opened another folder. There is one additional provision. He explained the 18-acre property. Garrett immediately argued. He reminded everyone that he had stayed in Marietta while I had left. He said he had carried the family name. Then he looked at me and repeated, "I made sure you would get nothing." Raymond calmly read Garrett's financial statement. Debt, loans, liabilities, negative net worth. Then he read mine. $583 million. The room went silent. Garrett stared at me as though he was seeing his sister for the first time. Then Raymond announced the decision. I was the only qualifying beneficiary. The 18 acres and the boathouse were mine. Garrett tried to protest, but suddenly he collapsed from his chair. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there holding Dad's carpenter's pencil, because I finally understood what his final condition meant. For most of his life, Dad believed the land belonged with the son. But near the end, he realized tradition couldn't protect something if the person inheriting it couldn't afford to keep it. He had finally chosen responsibility over tradition. 3 months later, Garrett lost the family house to foreclosure. His attempt to challenge the will failed, and the 18 acres remained mine. That winter, I took my daughter to the river property. The trees were bare. The river moved slowly. I pulled the brass key from my pocket and unlocked the old boathouse. Inside were Dad's fishing rods, a folding chair, and the familiar smell of cedar. My daughter ran toward the river. I sat on the steps, holding the carpenter's pencil. For years, I thought that key represented a home I had been forbidden to inherit. I was wrong. It represented the place my father had quietly saved for me. My brother believed being born a son made him worthy of everything. But I learned something different. Worth is not inherited. It is built. You cannot measure someone's value by their gender, their last name, or the seat they were born into. My brother inherited the house and the business. He lost both. I inherited a toolbox, a pencil, and 18 acres of riverfront land. But more importantly, I inherited the freedom to decide what came next. And as I watched my daughter standing beside that river, I finally understood. Girls do not marry out of their worth. Daughters do not become less important because they leave. And family legacy does not belong to whoever shouts the loudest. It belongs to whoever has the strength and courage to protect it. My brother thought he was throwing me out of my home. In the end, he only pushed me toward the place where I truly belonged. And when I unlocked that old boathouse, I wasn't coming home as the daughter who had been rejected. I was coming home as the woman they once believed could never become.